The wind was biting cold that morning, thick with December frost and silence. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, settling on the shoulders of the old school bus as it creaked along a winding road deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Inside, laughter and singing filled the space, voices young and bright, harmonizing to carols that echoed off the frosted windows. It was December 15th, 1972. The St. Brigid's Church Choir was en route to their annual winter retreat, a 3-day spiritual journey meant to reflect, bond, and rehearse for the Christmas Mass. 17 teenagers, all between ages 13 and 17, accompanied by 2 adult chaperones and Father Thomas Brenner, their newly assigned priest, barely 30 and filled with a calm sense of purpose. Father Brenner sat quietly near the front, fingers interlaced, eyes occasionally drifting toward the snow-covered wilderness outside. He had only been at St. Brigid's for 6 months, but his connection with the youth choir was immediate. They respected him, his kindness, his genuine smile, and the thoughtful way he listened. Most importantly, he believed in their potential, not just musically, but spiritually. "Only 1 more mile," the driver called, his voice muffled under layers of scarf and fatigue. The lodge, nestled at the end of a narrow trail, had once been a Franciscan retreat. It now served as the diocese's winter haven, simple wooden structure, small chapel, and rooms lined with creaky bunks. Among the choir was Rachel Moore, 15, with a voice that stopped conversations mid-sentence. She was curious, observant, and loved exploring old things. Her best friend, Lila, often teased that Rachel could turn any attic into a treasure hunt. Also on board was Daniel Peters, 17, tall and quiet, always watching, always protecting his younger brother Micah, who at 13 was the youngest in the group and sometimes the target of playful teasing. As the bus came to a halt before the snow-covered lodge, the teens burst into motion, arms full of sleeping bags and suitcases. The air smelled like pine and smoke, and from the chimney, thin trails of firewood-scented vapor curled into the overcast sky. That first day was calm. The choir rehearsed by candlelight, their voices swelling in the chapel until even the icicles outside seemed to vibrate with warmth. Laughter over cocoa followed prayers, and the lodge became a fortress of holiday spirit amidst the growing cold. But not everyone felt at ease. Late that evening, after lights had dimmed and the teenagers retreated to their bunks, the old caretaker who managed the grounds knocked softly at Father Brenner's door. His name was Jonah Creel, a man in his 70s, hands like bark and eyes that didn't blink enough. "You should keep them out of the chapel basement," he muttered, shifting his weight uneasily. "Especially at night." Brenner raised an eyebrow. "Why would that be?" Jonah looked at him for a long time. Not all things below were meant to stay quiet. He said no more. That night, as a heavy snow began to fall, Rachel couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, but something else kept her awake. Faint humming, a melody soft and strange, almost like a lullaby. She thought it came from beneath the floorboards, from the direction of the chapel. She wrapped herself in her blanket and slipped from the bunk room. The hallway was dark, the floor cold beneath her socks. She crept toward the chapel, the door slightly ajar, candles from evening mass still flickering low. She tiptoed down the aisle, breath held. The sound was clearer now. Humming. Human. Repetitive. It was coming from behind the altar. Rachel knelt, peering behind the wooden altar, where a small hatch lay sealed in the floor. She ran her fingers over the worn brass handle, cold and unmoving. Suddenly, the humming stopped. She froze. Then, nothing. Silence. Total and suffocating. In the morning, she didn't tell anyone, but she wasn't the only one who heard it. Danny had sat up most of the night beside his brother's bed, unsure why he felt so alert, so watched. The next day, the snow grew heavier. By evening, it was a whiteout, roads impassable. The choir gathered again in the chapel, rehearsing softly while wind battered the stained glass windows. A sudden gust extinguished every candle at once. The chapel went dark. Gasps filled the space. Father Brenner quickly relit one of the altar candles and smiled. "Just the wind," he said. But Rachel didn't believe him, nor did Danny. They could both feel it. Something wasn't right. Something was watching. If you love mysterious true stories like this one, make sure to subscribe for more chilling accounts every week. This is only the beginning. By morning, the snowfall had transformed the retreat into a white abyss. Flakes kept falling steadily, blurring the tree line, burying the narrow road that led back to town. The caretaker, Jonah Creel, muttered about needing chains for the tires, but the bus remained parked and still, half covered in snow. Father Brenner reassured the teens that they had enough food, firewood and supplies for a few more days. The retreat would continue as planned. Inside the lodge, a dim unease threaded its way through the group. Breakfast was quieter than usual. Micah, Danny's little brother, complained that his shoes were missing. Rachel had lost her journal. Lila's rosary, always hanging on her bunk post, was nowhere to be found. They chalked it up to forgetfulness or pranks. Still, Rachel kept glancing toward the chapel across the courtyard, where the snow had formed a perfect white mound against the front steps. By late afternoon, the wind picked up. The trees groaned under the weight of the snow, and the sky turned a colorless gray. Father Brenner gathered the choir in the common room for indoor rehearsal, trying to lift spirits, but the harmonies lacked their usual brightness. Voices wavered, some cracked. The warmth that had defined the group was thinning. That night, the snowstorm intensified. A blizzard warning crackled over the caretaker's ancient radio. No one would be coming or going anytime soon. At dusk, Rachel sat in the corner of the common room sketching in a replacement notebook. She couldn't stop thinking about the humming from the chapel. It hadn't returned, but the silence itself felt heavier. Jonah walked past her, carrying firewood to the lounge. She caught a glimpse of something strange on his forearm. Tattooed symbols, circular, etched in lines like some ancient script. He noticed her stare and quickly pulled his sleeve down. "Cold gets into the joints," he muttered, not making eye contact. Later that evening, the power flickered and died. The lodge fell into candlelight and shadows. The fireplace roared, its glow flickering on the walls like restless spirits. Everyone huddled close, even the older teens who usually stayed aloof. Father Brenner led them in prayer, his voice calm, though his eyes kept drifting toward the dark windows. That's when Danny heard it. A voice. Not singing, not speech, just a whisper, like someone breathing words through the snow. He turned toward the window behind the fireplace. There, just for a second, he thought he saw a face, pale, still, pressed against the glass. He stood abruptly. The others looked up. "What's wrong?" Lila asked. "Nothing," he lied, but Rachel knew he wasn't fine. His face had drained of color. She waited until the others settled before approaching him in the hallway. "You saw something?" He hesitated. "I don't know." Rachel didn't push. She didn't need to. The feeling was mutual. Something was off. Wrong in a way none of them could explain. Meanwhile, Father Brenner returned to the chapel to retrieve more candles. He stepped into the nave, greeted by the faint scent of incense still lingering from morning mass. The silence inside was oppressive, as if the air itself had thickened. He walked slowly past the pews toward the altar, candle in hand. That's when he noticed something odd. Behind the altar, faintly visible under decades of dust and cobwebs, was a seam in the stone wall. At first he thought it was a shadow, but upon closer inspection, it formed a clear vertical line, narrow and clean, almost like a hidden door. He touched it. Cold stone, solid. No handle, no sign of hinges. He ran his fingers along the edges, tracing the faint outline. It wasn't in any of the architectural plans he'd studied. He knelt, searching for any mechanism. Nothing, just stone. He looked up at the crucifix above the altar, whispering a soft prayer. Behind him, a soft thud echoed, like footsteps on the wooden floor. He turned. No one was there. The candle flickered violently, then went out. At the same time, back in the main lodge, Micah awoke in his bunk, gasping. He'd had a dream, a strange one. A voice whispering his name from beneath the floor. He scrambled from the bed, heart pounding, and crept to Danny's bunk. Danny, still wide awake, motioned for him to stay close. Neither would sleep that night. As dawn approached, the snow showed no sign of letting up. The world beyond the retreat had vanished into whiteness, and the warmth inside the lodge was now held together only by fire and faith. Yet even the fire seemed to burn a little colder. The storm showed no mercy. By the third night, the snow had piled waist-high along the lodge walls, windows dimmed by frost, doors creaking under the weight of ice. The power remained out, and the backup generator had sputtered its last breath that morning. Darkness claimed the retreat early, swallowing every corner in thick silence. Father Brenner kept his calm, or at least tried to. He moved from room to room by candlelight, checking on the choir members, ensuring the fireplaces were fed. The cold was manageable. But the fear, silent, swelling, was another matter. That night, just after dinner, Rachel stood staring out the lounge window, breath fogging the glass. Something moved in the tree line. Not an animal, not a person either. More like a shimmer, a ripple in the air. She blinked and it was gone. She turned to tell Danny, but he was already walking toward her. "You saw it too," he said, not asking. Rachel nodded slowly. Micah clung to Danny's side more than usual, eyes darting to the shadows that flickered from the fireplace. He hadn't said much since waking from another nightmare, this time about a song echoing through the woods, with voices that didn't belong to anyone he knew. At Brenner's urging, they gathered in the chapel once more for evening reflection. The candlelight shimmered along the stained glass, casting fractured colors across the wooden floor. The teens sat quietly, no one speaking, as Father Brenner read from the Psalms. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled ever so slightly. As the reading ended, the silence returned, thick, unbroken, unnatural. Then the bell rang. A single toll from the steeple above, deep and resonant. But there was no wind, and no one had pulled the rope. Jonah Creel stood suddenly at the back of the chapel. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something close to dread. "We have to go," he said. Everyone turned. Rachel stood. "What do you mean?" He pointed toward the front of the chapel, toward the altar. "Something's waking up." The candle nearest the altar sputtered out. Before Father Brenner could speak, the chapel doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. The temperature dropped instantly. Breath turned to vapor. A low sound vibrated through the pews, like dozens of voices humming out of sync, rising in pitch and volume. "Everyone back to the lodge," Brenner shouted. The group scattered, running across the icy path, snow whipping around them like hands trying to pull them down. Once inside, the doors were barred. Jonah poured salt across the thresholds, muttering in a language no one recognized. Rachel stood near the fireplace, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "What is this place?" she asked him. He didn't answer. That night, the group stayed together in the main room. No one slept. They huddled close, wrapped in blankets, the fire blazing high as the storm screamed outside. Just past midnight, Rachel noticed something odd. One of the candles on the mantel had begun to melt upward. The wax flowed in reverse, pooling at the top of the candle, defying gravity. She called Danny over, and he watched, wide-eyed, as another candle did the same. At that moment, Father Brenner heard a voice. Not with his ears, but deep in his chest. A memory, not his own. A woman's voice singing a hymn he'd never heard before but somehow knew. He turned toward the hallway and saw the faint glow of candlelight flickering beneath the chapel door, except no one had returned to the chapel. He moved toward it. "Don't go," Jonah said, grabbing his arm, but Brenner shook him off. "I have to see." The chapel door creaked open slowly. Inside, the candles were all lit. No wind, no cold, just a serene stillness. He stepped inside. That's when the door closed behind him and locked. The next morning, the sun rose behind thick clouds. The snow had stopped. Silence blanketed the retreat. A deputy from the local sheriff's office arrived by snowmobile around noon, having forced his way up the path after 3 days of failed radio contact. What he found shocked him. The bus was still there, but the lodge was empty. No footprints in the snow, no signs of struggle, no bodies, 17 teenagers, 2 adults, gone. Inside the chapel, the altar candles were lit. The air smelled faintly of incense, and on the altar, a single choir robe lay folded, untouched by dust or time. The investigation lasted weeks. Search dogs found nothing. Helicopters scoured the mountains. Psychics were brought in. Theories ranged from cult activity to mass abduction to spontaneous group disappearance. None made sense. Father Brenner was never found. Neither was Rachel, nor Danny, nor Micah. St. Brigid's never held another retreat. The lodge was sealed, forgotten, buried in silence. 18 winters passed. The lodge sat untouched, buried in snow and silence, the wooden cross above its chapel worn by time and storm. Locals spoke of it only in whispers, if at all. The diocese kept it quiet, officially abandoned due to weather damage. Unofficially, it had become a forgotten scar. But in early 1990, change stirred. Father Elias Monroe arrived in the village of St. Brigid's after the parish church had suffered extensive fire damage. The diocese assigned him to oversee repairs, but Elias, 43 and methodical, was no stranger to restoration, in buildings or in faith. Tall, with streaks of grey in his hair and eyes that seemed always half lost in contemplation, he wasn't here just for burned rafters. Something had drawn him here. In the rectory archives, among old financial records and service schedules, Elias found a folder misfiled under Retreat Lodging. Curious, he opened it. Inside were copies of police reports, photographs of teenagers in choir robes, handwritten statements by law enforcement, and one weathered article clipped from a 1972 local newspaper. 17 youths vanish without trace during church retreat. Priest missing. He stared at the headline, pulse quickening. No follow-ups, no explanations, no closure. He spent the next few days quietly asking around. Elder parishioners avoided the topic, shifting in their pews or pretending not to hear. Even younger locals offered only shrugs or half-lies, but there were patterns in their silence, and Elias was trained to listen for what wasn't said. One evening, while reviewing blueprints of the burned church, he found a side note indicating the retreat lodge had once functioned as an auxiliary chapel. A faded diagram outlined a small crypt below the altar. Elias leaned back, frowning. There had been no mention of any crypt in the disappearance reports. On a wind-bitten March morning, he made the decision. Alone, Elias hiked up the now barely visible path to the old retreat. The building loomed like a memory at the end of the world, half sunken in snow, windows blind with dust. He stepped inside with a breath held tight, flashlight in hand, boots crunching over debris. The air was stale, frozen, but not dead. He moved slowly through the main lodge, noting old blankets, a rusted space heater, half-rotted hymnals. Then across the courtyard, he saw the chapel. Its wooden door hung slightly ajar, despite the weather and time. Inside, dust covered every surface except the altar. It was clean, not freshly polished but untouched by time, as if nothing had ever landed upon it. A single candle sat on the left corner. He stood in the center aisle, breath visible in the cold. Then he heard it. Singing. Faint, almost imagined, multiple voices in unison, childlike, distant. He turned toward the sound. It came from behind the altar wall. He stepped closer, pressing a palm to the stone. It felt warmer than it should have. He pulled back, blinking. Then, gently, he knocked. The sound echoed deeper than expected, hollow. There was space behind the wall. Back at the rectory that evening, Elias retrieved all records available about the original builders. He learned that the retreat site had been purchased from a defunct monastic order in the 19th century. The order was dissolved after allegations of heretical rites and spiritual engineering that the church refused to detail. Elias scribbled notes late into the night, filling a notebook with references to underground chambers, sealed rites, and forgotten blessings. The more he read, the clearer the shape of something dark began to emerge. On his second visit, he brought tools. Removing a section of the altar wall carefully, Elias uncovered a sealed recess with symbols etched deep into stone. Latin phrases, Christian iconography twisted into something unfamiliar. He felt a heaviness in the air, as though the very room resisted his presence. He returned again and again, driven by something he couldn't name. The fifth time, he brought a crowbar. Behind the final layer of stone was a narrow staircase spiraling downward, swallowed in darkness. He didn't descend, not yet. That night, in his quarters, he dreamed of music, sweet, sorrowful voices echoing through a chamber lit by candlelight. At the center stood a girl with a white robe, her hands clasped in prayer. Her eyes locked onto his, and she whispered one word: help. He awoke at dawn, heart racing. Something had survived down there, something remembered. Father Elias returned to the chapel at sunrise, the frost crunching beneath his boots. The sky was a dull gray, clouds hanging low like a veil. He didn't bring food, he didn't bring water. Just his flashlight, the crowbar, and a small leather-bound Bible tucked under his arm. He descended the spiral staircase behind the altar, each step colder than the last. Dust clung to the stone walls, untouched for decades. The air shifted, damp, still, saturated with the faint smell of wax and mildew. With every step downward, the air thickened, as if reality itself was tightening around him. At the base of the stairs, the passage opened into a narrow corridor carved from stone. Faint engravings lined the walls, Latin prayers, some recognizable, others broken and distorted, their letters warped as if melted. He moved forward slowly, beam of light catching the edges of forgotten symbols. The corridor widened into a chamber. Pews lined either side, ancient and splintered, facing a crumbling pulpit. A lectern sat before them, its surface coated in dust save for a perfect circle, untouched. A hymnal, perhaps, long gone now. What chilled Elias wasn't the silence. It was the sense of presence. This place was not abandoned, it was watching. He walked forward, passing between the pews. At the far end of the chamber stood another wall, this one covered in carvings. Names, 17 names, each etched into stone in looping, almost delicate script. Beneath them, one date, December 16th, 1972. Elias reached out, his fingers grazing the grooves of the name Rachel Moore. Her name shimmered faintly, like condensation clinging to cold metal. Then came the sound. A soft chorus, humming, distant yet close. It didn't echo. It resonated as though rising not from the chamber, but from inside his own mind. He turned. No one. But the air was vibrating gently, a reverberation of something unspoken. He stepped back, gaze sweeping the walls. Along the lower edge, partially hidden behind vines of mildew, he noticed another line carved into the stone. For those who still sing, a door shall remain. His breath caught. He whispered a prayer under his breath, then traced the inscription with his thumb. The humming grew louder. With trembling fingers, he pressed against the wall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, movement. A low grinding sound as the center stone slowly gave way, revealing a narrow slit, just wide enough to squeeze through. Behind it, darkness waited. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The air here was warmer, laced with something almost floral. Not decay, not dust, but life. It made no sense. His flashlight flickered as he moved forward, revealing another chamber, smaller, circular, its walls lined with closed doors. 5 of them, all identical, each bearing a sigil, a circle pierced by 3 arrows radiating outward. He stepped closer to the first door and pressed his ear against it. Nothing. The second, stillness. But the third, a sound, breathing. He jolted back. It was slow, steady. Human. His heart pounded as he reached for the handle. It didn't turn. Instead, his fingers brushed a recess in the door, and the moment his skin made full contact, the sigil lit up faintly, pale gold against the stone. Then it faded. The breathing stopped. Suddenly, all 5 doors lit up at once, and from the ceiling a wind blew, not air, but sound. A rush of voices singing a slow, sorrowful harmony. It wrapped around him like cloth, heavy and suffocating. Elias dropped to his knees, clutching his ears, whispering scripture under his breath. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. Silence fell like snow. He stood shakily and turned to leave, but something made him stop. On the wall opposite the doors, a tapestry hung. Molded, frayed, yet unmistakable, a scene of children in white robes, singing before a great chasm in the earth. Behind them stood a man with outstretched arms, light pouring from his hands toward the darkness. The priest, not Elias, someone else. But he recognized the face. He had seen that face in the folder, Father Thomas Brenner. He stumbled backward, breath ragged. This wasn't just a burial site, it was a sanctuary, a prison, a memory made stone. And somewhere behind those doors, something waited, something that remembered his name. As he turned back toward the staircase, the humming resumed. This time, the melody was different. It was a hymn, one he had never heard, but one he somehow knew. Father Elias didn't speak of the doors to anyone. For days he remained silent, haunted by the melody that still echoed faintly in his dreams. Each night it returned, low, harmonic, always distant, yet deeply familiar. And always, the same voice stood out among the rest, a girl's voice, crystalline and aching. He returned to the chapel every morning. By the third visit, he began hearing movement, soft footsteps that stopped when he listened. The breath of air that vanished when he turned. Then, on a grey morning with fog blanketing the hills, she appeared. At first, he thought she was a hallucination, a side effect of sleep deprivation or the silence that gripped this mountain place. But when she spoke, it wasn't with the randomness of a dream. She stood just beyond the altar, pale, barefoot, in a white choir robe stained with age. Her hair was long and dark, framing a face that bore no malice, only sorrow. "You found the door," she whispered. Elias froze. "Who are you?" Her lips trembled. "Rachel." The name hit him like thunder. He stepped forward, voice catching. "Rachel Moore?" She nodded once, slowly. "We didn't mean to sing it." Elias felt the chapel sway under the weight of her words. "What do you mean?" "Sing what?" "The binding hymn," she said, voice cracking. "Father Brenner taught it to us, said it was for protection, but it wasn't. It called something to us." He knelt in the center aisle, unable to look away. "You've been here since 1972. Rachel glanced toward the sealed door behind the altar. "Time doesn't move here. Not the way it does up there. We're caught between." He noticed her hands, trembling, semi-transparent, flickering like candlelight in a draught. "You're not alive," he said. She smiled faintly. "Not the way you are." Elias wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but his training, his faith, held him still. "What happened?" he asked. "What did Brenner do?" Rachel sat on the altar step, eyes lowered. "He found a ritual in a book that shouldn't have been in this chapel. It wasn't Latin, not exactly, but he thought it was ancient Christian mysticism, some long-forgotten rite of sanctification. He believed it would make the retreat sacred ground, untouchable by evil." Her voice grew thinner, but he was wrong. Elias felt the cold settle deeper in his bones. "He led us through it," she continued, "one night during the storm. We sang the notes, said the words, and then something opened." "What do you mean?" "A rift," she said, "a place where the veil thins. The thing on the other side. It heard us." Elias gripped his Bible tighter. Rachel leaned closer, her form flickering again. "Brenner tried to stop it. He sacrificed himself to seal the rift. But the seal wasn't perfect. It needed anchors." She paused and tears welled in her eyes. "We were the anchors." He struggled to speak. "You were trapped to hold the seal in place." She nodded. "Tethered, in between. Not fully dead. Not truly alive. We sleep. We wake. We sing." Elias felt his chest tighten. "Why show yourself now?" She hesitated. "Because it's weakening. The walls grow thin again. You're the first to hear us in years. If the seal breaks completely, it won't just take us. She looked up and her eyes were filled with terror. "It will take everything." Elias staggered to his feet. "There has to be a way to fix it." "There is," Rachel said, "but it's not simple." The air around her shimmered. "You'll have to descend fully. Face what lies beneath the 5th door, that's where he is." "Who?" "Brenner," she said softly. "But he's not the same." Elias stepped back. "What do you mean?" She stood now, her presence dimming. "He holds the hymn," she said. "Finish it, and the choir can rest, but be warned." Her voice was now a whisper, fading like wind through leaves. "If you fail, the doors won't close again." Then she was gone. Elias stood alone in the chapel, heart pounding, the silence thicker than before. He stared at the altar, the hidden passage behind it, the weight of her story pressing hard on his soul. He now knew the truth. The rift still pulsed below the stone, and something inside was still listening. The wind howled louder that night. As if the mountain itself had begun to breathe, Father Elias returned to the underground chamber with oil, salt, and a copy of the exorcism rites. He carried a rosary that had once belonged to his mentor, his hand gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. He passed the wall of names again, whispering each aloud as he touched them, as if naming the lost could somehow bring them closer to peace. Then he stepped beyond. The passage with the 5 doors stood unchanged, but something in the air had shifted. The silence felt deeper, as though the very walls awaited his next step. He approached the final door, the 5th one. Its sigil was darker than before, the stone beneath slightly cracked. As he reached toward it, the torchlight flickered wildly. He steadied his breath, then pressed his palm to the door. The sigil ignited. Not gold this time, but crimson. And the door opened with a groan that sounded almost like a voice. Beyond was a spiral descent, deeper than the staircase behind the altar. As he walked downward, the temperature dropped, but Elias felt sweat on his neck. The walls glowed faintly with inscriptions, verses, symbols, echoes of language not meant for mortal mouths. At the bottom, he entered a domed chamber unlike any he'd seen. It was a sanctuary, but twisted. The walls were lined with relics, crosses bent at odd angles, icons whose faces were scrubbed blank. Candles burned in places untouched by wind. In the center stood an altar made of black stone, etched with runes that shimmered as if alive. Upon it lay a book, large, bound in leather that pulsed faintly with breath. Elias stepped forward and opened it. The pages were aged and brittle, filled with diagrams, hymns, and something more. Notations in 2 different handwritings. He recognized the first. It matched Father Brenner's signature from the diocese file. The second was less clear, erratic, almost frantic. One passage stood out, marked with ink so dark it bled through the page. The Mass must be completed but reversed. Only then can the anchors be freed. He turned the next page and found a diagram, a circle of voices, 17 symbols for 17 souls, surrounding a central figure. The priest, the conduit. He understood now. Brenner had led the ritual. It had worked, but at a terrible cost. The hymn they sang hadn't sanctified the ground. It had opened the rift. The voices of the choir had stabilized it, but only because the priest had stayed behind to tether them. And now to free them, someone else would have to take his place. Elias closed the book and felt a presence behind him. Slowly he turned. A figure stood in the shadows beyond the altar, draped in a tattered stole, robes hanging loose over a skeletal frame. His eyes glowed faintly beneath a hood. His face, half decayed, half preserved, still bore traces of who he once was, Father Thomas Brenner. Elias did not flinch. "Brenner?" he asked. The figure tilted its head. "You heard her." "Rachel." Her name lingered in the air. "You held the hymn," Elias said. "You anchored the seal." Brenner's voice was a blend of echo and breath, and failed. "It's fraying. They are slipping. I was not strong enough." Elias stepped forward, holding the rosary. "There must be a way." "There is." Brenner moved aside, revealing a shallow bowl of ash beside the altar. Sing the reverse. Light the circle. Offer the voice of a priest who does not seek salvation but silence. Elias's hands trembled. You mean, I must stay? Brenner's eyes dimmed. Only blood ties the hymn. Only sacrifice closes the gate. Elias felt every instinct scream, but he also felt the memory of Rachel's voice, her plea. He opened the book again. The reversed hymn was unlike anything he'd ever read. Each note written backward, syllables curved in unnatural ways. It was not a song of joy, but of release. He lit the candles, drew the circle in ash, marked 17 points with salt and prayer. As he began to sing, the chamber shifted. One by one, faint forms appeared around the circle. Youths in choir robes, eyes wide, mouths opening in mirrored motion. They joined the hymn. 17 voices, soft and steady. And then a tear opened in the air above the altar. Darkness poured through. Brenner moved toward it, whispering something inaudible. And Elias kept singing, his voice growing stronger, even as the candle flames bent inward. The rift pulsed, hungry and alive, and the final verse remained. Only he could finish it. As the last notes of the reversed hymn echoed through the chamber, the rift above the altar pulsed violently, like a wound resisting closure. Elias stood within the circle, voice raw, robes damp with sweat. Around him, the 17 apparitions held their place, mouths still moving, though no sound escaped now. One by one, their forms began to change. They grew sharper, more solid. Rachel stood among them, her hands clasped, lips trembling as she mouthed the final verse. Micah appeared beside her, eyes wide, no longer flickering shadows but whole, if only briefly. Elias felt the air shift. The rift responded, its surface cracking, light spilling out in blinding streaks. But it didn't close, instead it twisted, and from it stepped a figure. Not Brenner, not human. Something tall, cloaked in black shadow, its face hidden beneath layers of motionless fabric. Its limbs bent wrong, its presence radiated pressure, like gravity collapsing inwards. The choir fell silent. Elias stumbled backward, clutching the book. The thing tilted its head, as if studying the scene. Then, movement. From the edge of the room, Father Brenner stepped into view. Still wearing the robes of ritual, but his face now clearer, a man lost to time. He met Elias's eyes across the circle and spoke, voice hollow. You must finish it now. But the rift, Elias began. Brenner interrupted. The seal cannot hold if we wait. This is the moment. Elias looked at the choir. Rachel nodded. You must end it. The entity stood just beyond the circle, unable or unwilling to cross. It watched, waiting. Elias raised the hymnal, voice steady. He began the final line. The ground trembled, the air groaned, the rift sparked. Rachel closed her eyes and sang the same line. One by one, the others followed. The harmony built, not in volume, but in weight. It was the sound of longing, of pain, of release. It filled the chamber like rising water. The entity shuddered, its form rippled, and then it screamed, not with a mouth, but with light. A burst of darkness that collapsed inward, trying to draw the singers into itself. Brenner stepped forward, arms outstretched, and stood in its path. The entity collided with him, and for a moment, time fractured. Elias saw glimpses, Brenner leading the children in the ritual, Brenner falling to his knees as the rift opened, Brenner reaching out in agony as the choir vanished around him, and then stillness. The rift flickered once, twice, then closed, gone. The entity vanished with it. Elias collapsed to the floor, gasping. When he looked up, the chamber was changed. The ash circle was gone. The candles snuffed, and the choir, still there. Rachel stepped forward. Her eyes were wet with something like joy. We're free, Elias nodded slowly. You're at peace now. But she hesitated. Not yet. He stood, legs weak. What else? You, she whispered. You must let go. He didn't understand, until he looked down. His own hands flickered. His body, no longer casting a shadow. He turned toward the altar. The book was gone. So was Brenner, so was the rift. Only the 17 remained. "You took his place," Rachel said gently. "No," Elias breathed. "You chose to finish the song. That made you the anchor." He stepped backward, shaking his head. "No, I thought, just to release you." Rachel placed her hand on his. "You saved us. But the gate needed a soul to hold it closed. And it took yours." Elias looked at the others. They stood in quiet reverence, watching, waiting. There was no malice, only sadness, only peace. "I didn't mean, you did what no one else could." Rachel turned to the others, and then they began to fade. One by one, each figure lifted into light, bright, soft, and absolute. Micah smiled. Lila waved gently. Even Danny, ever stoic, gave Elias a nod before vanishing. Only Rachel remained a moment longer. She leaned in close, voice like a memory. "Thank you." Then she too dissolved into light, and Elias was alone. Not trapped, not punished, but still. The silence returned. Total. Final. Only the candle at the far end remained lit, flickering softly. Elias looked toward the sealed door and sat down. He closed his eyes and waited. Silence held. The chamber lay still, the rift sealed, the choir gone. Yet Elias remained, seated on the stone floor, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed, not in defeat, but in contemplation. The air was warmer now, no longer thick with tension, but with something gentler, almost sacred. He was alone, and yet not. The moment stretched, and then from the far end of the chamber, a glow began to rise. Not the light of the rift, nor the flicker of candle flame, but a golden pulse, soft and rhythmic, like breath made visible. Elias opened his eyes. It emanated from the black altar. He stood slowly, body no longer heavy, his limbs neither weak nor bound by fatigue. He walked toward it. The surface of the altar, once engraved with ancient symbols, now bore a new mark, his name. Carved simply, Elias Monroe. He placed his hand over it. A low hum filled the air, vibrating from the stone and into his chest. Then, without warning, the ground began to tremble. Not violently, but deeply, like something shifting far beneath the earth. The chamber walls echoed with a low, guttural chant. Not from within, but from beyond. It was back. The rift had sealed, but the entity had not been destroyed. It had merely retreated, waiting, testing. The cost had not yet been paid in full. Elias clenched his fists. He knew what was required. Sacrifice was never symbolic. It was action, a choice. And now, as the chamber pulsed around him, he made his. He stepped into the center once more, arms raised, voice rising with new strength. He began the hymn again, not the reversed version, but the original, the one the choir had sung in innocence. Now, reformed by intention, transformed by knowledge, each note struck like a bell across the stone, reverberating through the walls. The darkness answered. It surged at the edges, testing the circle once more. A tendril of shadow reached toward him, slow and searching. Elias did not flinch. He sang louder. Flames lit at the edges of the room, not fire, but pure energy, golden and alive, tracing the lines of the original ritual circle. Symbols ignited in turn: peace, protection, surrender, hope. The tendril recoiled, hissing, but another followed. Then another. The darkness swirled into the shape of the entity once more, its form more defined than before, towering, reaching, resisting. Elias stepped forward. "I know you now," he said. "You are hunger, but I am not here to feed you." He raised the rosary, and light burst outward. The entity shrieked. Elias kept walking toward it, singing louder. Every word carried not by fear, but purpose. "You were summoned by mistake. I call you back by will." The ground beneath cracked, the air tore, and from within the light, the faces of the choir appeared once more, not as spirits, but as echoes. They sang with him, voices aligned, powerful, unwavering. Rachel's voice rose above the others, clear, beautiful, defiant. The entity roared in rage. Elias stepped into it, into the core of the shadow. And everything turned white. Light exploded through the chamber, cleansing every surface, burning away the twisted icons, restoring the walls, sealing the stones. The entity let out a final cry, long, despairing, and then nothing. Silence. When the light faded, the altar stood bare. The book was gone. The relics vanished, and Father Elias was nowhere to be found. But above the altar, carved into the stone, a new verse had appeared. One voice silenced the gate, one soul kept the song. Outside, the mountain wind calmed. In the village below, the bells at St. Brigid's rang on their own for the first time in years. The people stopped and listened, and for a moment they swore they heard singing in the distance, gentle, layered, peaceful. The choir was gone, but the memory remained, and the gate was closed. Spring came late to the Appalachian Hills that year. The retreat lodge remained sealed, but rumors trickled back into the village. The path had been cleared by early hikers, and one of them reported finding the chapel doors ajar. No signs of intrusion, no evidence of fire or storm. Just a single candle lit on the altar, its wax fresh, flame flickering as if waiting for someone to notice. Father Elias Monroe was never seen again. The diocese declared him missing after weeks of silence. A small plaque was mounted in the restored St. Brigid's Church, honoring his service during the fire recovery. Most believed he'd gone on sabbatical, burnout perhaps. Those closer to him knew better, though they didn't say it aloud. Something had changed. The villagers noticed it first. The air felt clearer around the church grounds. Children who had refused to enter the old sanctuary now played freely near the garden. The bell tower, long silent, began to chime again, never at scheduled times but at dusk, with a note so pure it brought tears to some without explanation. And sometimes, if you stood near the altar after sunset, you could hear it, singing, not loud, not eerie, just soft, distant, and achingly beautiful, like memory-given sound. The church groundskeeper, Mrs. Corley, found something curious in the days that followed. Tucked behind a loose stone in the rectory chimney, wrapped in cloth and sealed with wax, a leather-bound journal, the name inside, Father Elias Monroe. Its pages told no grand story, only fragments, dreams of music, sketches of symbols, names written again and again in careful script. Rachel, Danny, Micah, Lila, Father Brenner. Near the final entry was a passage scrawled in hurried pen. "They are still with us, just not where we look." Word of the journal spread. A local archivist requested to copy it, but the diocese quietly declined. The book was returned to the same stone recess where it had been found. A decision, they said, to preserve what should remain untouched. The lodge itself became a place of quiet pilgrimage. Not officially. No tours, no plaques. But hikers sometimes paused there, drawn by something they couldn't name. They'd stand outside the chapel for a time, heads bowed, then leave in silence. Those who dared to step inside often returned pale and quiet, claiming to feel a presence gentle and watching. Some said the lodge should be torn down. Others insisted it was sacred. In time, no one argued. It simply remained, weathered, quiet, and untouched. And the stories faded as they always do. But once a year, on the night of December 16th, someone places 17 white candles along the chapel rail. No one knows who. The snow never shows footprints, yet the candles are always there, lit with care, their flames steady even in the wind. Locals stopped questioning it. Some call it tradition. Some call it faith. One winter, a young seminarian assigned to the village began digging into the choir's disappearance. He scoured the old records, read the police reports, and found nothing conclusive. But something kept tugging at him. He climbed to the lodge himself. Inside the chapel, the dust lay thick except on the altar. He saw the marks. He heard the faintest echo of harmony. And as he turned to leave, a single sheet of music fell from the lectern. It bore no title, only notes, and in the margin, a phrase in Father Elias's handwriting, "If you sing it, mean it." He never forgot those words. Years later, he told the story to a small gathering of parishioners, not as fact but as mystery, as a reminder that not all miracles shine and not all battles are seen. He ended with this: "There are places in the world where the veil grows thin, and sometimes when darkness presses hardest, it is song, not sword, that holds it back." The room was silent. Then, softly, an elderly woman in the front row began to hum. It was a melody none of them recognized, but all of them remembered. If you were captivated by this mysterious tale, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to click the video on your screen for another unbelievable true story. Some secrets don't sleep, they sing.